Good morning, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hopefully you are supposed to be here for facilitating successful hybrid meetings. We are the Community Health Training Institute. I think I'm gonna let Kelly give us a little bit more context about that, but just wanna make sure everyone is in the right place. Everyone can see us, everyone can hear us. I see some people saying good morning in the chat. Feel free to keep doing that. We're definitely gonna get to know each other a little bit better over the next couple of days, but please let us know who you are, where you're coming from today, maybe if you want to, how you're feeling this morning. It's a little bit gray and dark out here in Boston, so trying to bring the energy. The playlist definitely helped a little bit. But I'm gonna let Kelly tell everyone a little bit more about who we are at CHTI, and then we're all gonna go ahead and introduce ourselves, and then we'll give you a chance to do that a little bit later. So Kelly, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Great. Thanks, Tanayo. Good morning, everyone. It's really nice to see some familiar faces. Gina and I have been on this project for about 5 years now, and I feel like we're really getting a chance to get to know our audience. So it's nice to see some old faces, but also always even better to see some new faces as well. Again, my name is Kelly Dankert. My pronouns are she, her. I am a program manager at Health Resources in Action, which is kind of the parent organization of the Community Health Training Institute. I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves in just a moment, but the Community Health Training Institute, or CHTI for short, is a fantastic resource that is a partnership between Health Resources in Action and the Department of Public Health in Massachusetts, and we really exist just to support you all. We offer free trainings in a variety of topics. Historically, they have been in-person trainings. We've popped up all over the state, from North Adams to Worcester to New Bedford. But given the context of the world that we're living in, we have gone fully remote for the past year and a half, and we are kind of dipping our toes into what that might look like when we return into a hybrid world. And so that really brings us to today. While we've given some thoughts and some practice into facilitating successful hybrid meetings. So, the Community Health Training Institute, hopefully one day we can go back to in-person, but for now we're living in this comfy online hybrid space. But apart from providing free trainings for coalition members, community members, grassroots organizers, public health professionals, policymakers, really anyone, we also provide resources in the form of blog posts on our website, toolkits. We have a fantastic newsletter that Tanayo creates every month with job postings, partner events, a ton of really good stuff. So if you all have any jobs that you want to have posted, or resources or events that you want to share, do not hesitate to reach us as well. And we really just encourage you to check out our website because it is new. We recently gave it a facelift and we're very happy and proud of it. So feel free to click around, sign up for more trainings with us, with our partners, but we're really happy to be here today, and our training is free thanks to our generous funding from the Mass Department of Public Health. So with that, I can pass it back to my colleagues and our trainers today to introduce themselves. So Gina, I'll pass it over to you next.
Awesome. Good morning. Good morning. I echo exactly what Kelly said. We've been on this project for 5 years now, and it's so wonderful to see some familiar faces. This is our first official training of the year, so we're very excited to be here. I am finishing up my first cup. I'm ready for my second cup of coffee. It is a gray morning here. I am physically located in Central Massachusetts. Typically with CHTI, I would be a traveling trainer, so I would go wherever we host trainings, but for the last year and a half, I've just been sitting here in Auburn. But I am so excited to be here today. Again, my name is Gina Rodriguez. I use the she, her pronouns, and I serve as the senior project manager for the Community Health Training Institute for the last 5 or so years. And I come to you with about, let's see if I can do my math right, just over 16 years of facilitation experience. The last 5 years, obviously, doing more public health focused topics. And I do have a wealth of experience doing youth trainings, peer leader trainings, working within the Boston Public Schools, after school program. It kind of runs the gamut. So I've been doing a lot of thinking around what this looks like now that we're in this remote context. And, you know, with trying to figure out, are we going to do hybrid training? Sounds like we probably are, as we take our guidance from the Department of Public Health, trying to figure out what that looks like and how we can take our tools, our skills, and things that we've learned along the way, and adapt them to what our community needs. So we're very excited to have you today and to share what we've kind of come up with and put together for this specific training. So hello again, good morning. Happy to see your faces, and I will pass it over to Tanaya.
Awesome. So hello again, my name is Tanaya Crow. I use she, her pronouns. I have been on this project for about 3 years. Sometimes it feels like longer, but it's been really fun all along the way. I serve as an administrative coordinator for the Community Health Training Institute. I'm really excited to be here with you all today, but you're going to get to hear my voice a lot more coming up. So I'm going to pass it to Jasper and give them a chance to introduce themselves. They're our wonderful tech person today. So go ahead, Jasper.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jasper. I use they, them pronouns. And as Tanaya said, I will be your primary tech point person for today. So if you run into any issues, joining, leaving spaces, the meeting, audio, whatever, feel free to reach out to me via the chat. And I will do my very darndest to try to help you. I'm coming to you all from New Jersey, actually. So, you know, proving in this remote world, we can all work from a lot of different places, but it's great to be with you all. And if you don't like the music, I am so sorry. And with that, I will pass it back to our wonderful facilitators.
Awesome. Thank you, Jasper. So I think with that, we're just going to go ahead and dive in. So I think many of us are probably very familiar with Zoom at this point, but just in case you're not, one of our best practices here is to just make sure that we're grounding folks in the platforms that we're using. So just to point out some of the tools you have on Zoom, you have your mute button, your start stop video button. If you haven't already, you can always add a virtual background if you're feeling fresh and fun today. We invite you to use the chat function as much as you would like to participate. I know not everyone is, you know, not everyone wants to speak vocally, wants to speak in a big group. So feel free to engage with us in the chat. We love that. And then we're going to be using that annotate function a little bit later. So I'll explain that more. And then I just want to point out, if you're only seeing my face right now, you might be in speaker view. I'd encourage you to switch to gallery view. You just click where that little button is up in the top right-hand corner under view. That way you can see all of our lovely faces and not just myself or Gina, as lovely as we are. But it's always great to see everybody. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. We are going to be doing some breakout rooms today, so I won't read this all to you, but just please note we will be offering you the chance to not join breakout rooms if you are in a space maybe where you need to go check on something else, or if that's just not how you want to engage with us today. We definitely want to make sure that we're honoring that. If you do choose to join in this way, we will just pop you on in there. You'll have all the same functions. It's pretty straightforward. But of course, if you get stuck, you can always click the awesome Ask for Help button. Myself, Gina, Kelly, or Jasper can always pop in and make sure that everything is going okay. So any questions about Zoom? Anyone having any issues at this point? Or if we're all good, we can also give a physical thumbs up. You can do a virtual thumbs up. You can nod your head, you know, excitedly, however you want to confirm that we're all set to go. Okay, great. I'm seeing lots of thumbs. I'm seeing some head nods. Awesome. So I think the next little thing we wanted to mention was just joining by phone audio. If you are having any bandwidth issues, we definitely recommend this. All you have to do is click the little caret top next to your mute button, click join by phone audio, and then you follow these super straightforward prompts. You just dial in, type in your meeting ID, and then type in your participant PIN, and that will connect your face to your phone. So we do recommend that if you're having any issues with audio today. It's always great to join in, dial in by phone. So I think next slide. Great. So we wanted to share the learning objectives for today. So we're here for facilitating successful hybrid meetings. So of course, our first sort of big chunk of this is going to be talking about facilitation skills. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between in-person, online, and hybrid, mostly focusing on hybrid, which is why you're all here, but just to kind of name some of the differences that you might encounter as you're sort of working in these different spaces. We're going to talk about promising practices for facilitating groups across locations and platforms, which is really, what hybrid is. And I guess I'll take this moment just to say that when we say hybrid, what we really mean is we have people in person and we have people online. And typically we're going to be operating from the standpoint of there's a facilitator in the room and there may also be one online, but there also may not. In this case today, we are both joining virtually. So we just wanted to name that as well. Gina and I are not in the same space. We do not have small groups with us today. And the reason for that is because this is really more of a training setup versus a meeting. And because of the way that we run these trainings, they're very interactive. There's lots of moving pieces. It's a little bit more logistically complicated. And so for the sake of making sure that we could all, have the most successful training, we decided to join virtually. But of course, if you have any questions about that, feel free to ask us, pop it in the chat, unmute yourself now if you would like to. And if not, I'll just name our third learning objective, which is to discuss challenges and solutions to difficult hybrid meeting scenarios. We have a really fun activity planned for day 2. So that's the teaser. Hopefully y'all come back on Thursday. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So just to show you all sort of what our plan is for today, we're in our welcome and introductions. We're going to give you all a chance to meet each other in just a minute. We're going to start the day by talking a little bit about approaches to facilitation, thinking about what makes a good facilitator, and really not us telling you what that is, but you having a chance to think about it and decide that for yourself and what that looks like. We're going to move into some hybrid considerations, talk about what we like to call our packing list, so things to consider when you're setting up for a hybrid meeting, spend a lot of time talking about challenges, and then close for the day. Any questions about our agenda? We all still good? Awesome. So today we are going to offer you these group agreements. This is really another sort of promising practice, best practice, just to create and hold a space for each other. We, of course, this is not the exhaustive list of group agreements we could have come up with, but given, the size of this group, we wanted to offer just a few to kind of get us going. And we are, of course, always open to hearing more, always open to hearing what's not working. So just to name, if you can, we would love to see your face. Of course, we all totally understand. Maybe you have children at home, maybe you have pets, a roommate, a partner, something is happening in your house and you do not want anyone seeing that. That is completely fine. There is no pressure to turn your camera on. But if you can and you're feeling like you want to, we would love to see your face. We ask that you mute yourself if you're not speaking, just mostly to cancel out any feedback or background noise. But of course, we don't want that to prevent you from coming off of mute to talk to us. We'd love to hear your voices. We'd also ask that, if you're someone who isn't always the most vocal, I'm usually someone like this who maybe holds back or doesn't want to share out loud. We ask that you take that space and that you share your thoughts. And if you're someone maybe who's a little bit more vocal, more participatory, of course, we don't want to dissuade you from participating. Please participate. But maybe, we ask that you recognize when you might be taking a lot of space and maybe just step back and make a little space for other folks. Of course, this is supposed to be a respectful environment. So please be respectful of yourself and each other. And also take care of yourself. If you need to step out for a minute, please do that. If you need to take a call, do what you have to do to take care of yourself, grab food, grab water, etc. We definitely don't want to tie you to your computer, but we also ask, if you can try and be engaged while you're here, that would be awesome. I know it's really tempting to want to look at email, want to answer other things. So if you can try and be present, that would be amazing. But also we completely understand that you have other things happening in your life. So I want to just give us a minute to actually agree to these agreements. So again, if I could see physical thumbs, reaction thumbs, head nods, or if anyone is like, absolutely not, I don't agree with any of these, like now is a great chance to speak up and let us know that. But I'm seeing, so many thumbs. Oh, this is so cool. On my participant box, I can see all of you putting your thumbs up. That's so fun. So that seems like a good majority. So I think with that, we're going to move into our intros for you all. So we're going to put you into some breakout rooms in just a moment, but we just wanted to show you what you're going to be talking about. So once you're in these small groups, you're going to share your name, your pronouns, your organization, and or where you're coming from today. And then our intro questions are really, spend a few minutes talking about the last time you were at a meeting that really felt productive, and just think about why that was, and share that. And we also want to ask you, how is privilege showing up and how we're engaging with people? And this question is really coming from a space of, I'm sitting at a nice office with 2 monitors and all the technology I could possibly need to be here today, but not everyone can do that, right? So thinking about stuff like that, is it technology? Is it internet access? Is it having a space to meet with people? Just consider, where there might be privilege and where there might be gaps for the meetings and events that you're trying to hold. And I think that was all I had to say about this, Gina, unless I missed something here. So with that,
I think we're good.
Great. With that, again, if you do not want to join a breakout room, we're not going to force you to. But if you are ready to go, ready to rumble, introduce yourself, we're going to go ahead and do that, Jasper, whenever you are ready. Hopefully that went well. Oh my gosh, every single time that voice pops in. I'm just like, what is it? Who is it? Give folks about 10 more seconds to come back as the room starts to rip you away. Awesome. Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully that went well. You got to meet maybe some new faces, some new people. I would love to hear if anyone wants to either share in the chat or out loud just some of the things you talked about. If there was a highlight that you shared or that someone else shared, we would love to hear that.
Well, I'll report from our chat room 11. There were 3 of us.
Sure.
And we did discuss a little bit about the technical challenges with hybrid meetings, particularly with people that may not have access to a computer, and so are looking at everything on their phone screens, which can be too small if you're showing slides, and other issues like, do you have privacy if you're in a business or in a school or someplace else? Do you have the location where you can participate in a Zoom meeting or facilitate a Zoom meeting and not be interrupted by other people who may also be in the same meeting or maybe on other meetings? So space requirements and quiet areas to facilitate were a couple of the issues that we talked about.
Yeah, thank you. Is it Joanne or Joan?
It's Joanne.
Joanne, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. That's definitely something we're going to get to a little bit later in this training. Yeah, and I'm seeing in the chat some folks agreeing tech is a huge challenge, a huge issue, particularly for hybrid and for virtual spaces. So thank you, Joanne.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I see Amy saying keeping clear agenda items, following up with action items, definitely. And Margaret, yep, we want to be in person, but also we want to be inclusive. Yeah, we have the same challenge here. A lot of our full-time staff are remote, so we are pretty much always doing hybrid or virtual. Jen, you raised your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think all these things that complicate like online meetings was definitely something we talked about, but as well, the things that used to make in-person meetings not great still are there. So like not addressing any group dynamics or relationships, among the team members, like that to me is what makes an effective meeting as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I love that. The problems we had before are still there. Absolutely. I see Sherry sharing a larger meeting took place. There was no agenda. Yeah, relationship buildings, absolutely. I definitely miss that. I'm at the office today, but I think I might be the only one here. I definitely miss having all my colleagues around me. So yeah, I'm seeing a lot of really great things in here around agendas, around technology, relationships. Yep, definitely around privilege. Yep, meeting people where they're at. Remembering not everyone has the same resources. That's great. Thank you for naming that. Yeah, we definitely want to make sure that whatever form of meeting that we're using, we're being as inclusive as we possibly can. So that's great. And thank you, Thomas, also for sharing. Yep. Yeah, not everyone can be on Zoom. Not everyone has access. Maybe they're on a phone. So yeah, we want to make sure that we're coming up with ways to engage people that are going to work for everybody, definitely. Thank you all so much for sharing. It sounds like those were great intro conversations. We do want to do a really quick poll before we jump into some content. So Jasper, whenever you're ready, we're going to launch a poll. And Kelly, if you move us to the next slide, folks can also see the question on there. So we're really asking you again, how often are you engaging with hybrid meetings? Is it a lot? Are you only doing them? Have you never done them? Are you like, what is a hybrid meeting? Am I in the wrong place? What is your experience? And every answer is totally okay. We love all levels of experience. And in fact, I didn't name this earlier, but as you're taking the poll, one of our values as trainers is really to crowdsource the expertise in the room. And so, Gina and I are going to share what we know, but of course we're not, the be all end all experts of hybrid meetings. So anything that you have learned or experienced, we definitely want to hear that. We want your experience. We want your expertise. We're all teachers and learners, as we say. So I'm watching these trickle in. Oh, we're already at 79%. All right. Yes. Go team. This is great. We'll give everyone maybe another minute to finish filling this out. And yes, I can watch the numbers go up. So I know when people haven't answered, not who, but can watch you all as you trickle in. 84%. Let's see if we can get it up to 90. I think we can do it. 86%. Give you all 30 more seconds. And we'll get to this later, but I also like to just sit in silence and let people do things. So I'm gonna stop talking for the next 20 seconds and let you finish. Okay, looks like the trickle has stopped. So are we sharing? Can everyone see the results now? Looking for some nods. Yes, awesome. So it looks like most people are doing a mix, which is great. I think that's kind of where our organization is at as well. A few of you are only doing hybrid meetings. I definitely want to hear from y'all. Some people are still just doing virtual, about 24% of you. About 11% of you have never attended or led a hybrid meeting. That's awesome. Hopefully you'll be able to walk away with some learnings from this. And then a few of you do not identify with any of these categories, and that's also great. So thank you all so much for that. Really appreciate it. It's just great for us to get a sense of who's in the room today. So I think with that, I'm going to pass it to Gina. We're going to talk a little bit about facilitation.
Awesome. Thank you, Tanaya. I appreciate that. I encourage folks to continue sharing in the chat box, kind of, or sharing out loud if there anything kind of sparks your questions or ideas as we're talking through some of this. And what I will say is for those of you that have come to a number of CHTI trainings, perhaps you came to our facilitation training last year. Some of this information might look a little familiar. I think the elements of the way that we think about facilitating meetings or what makes a good meeting are kind of core to the way that we plan and prep for trainings and meetings. And so some of that information will be the same. But I think, the spin for this year obviously is trying to figure out how we can then take some of those core foundational pieces of how we like to run and connect with folks in our meetings and bring them to this hybrid space. So what does that mean? And so you all shared in your introductions, talking a little bit about sort of like what are things that are challenging or ways that privilege is showing up, and what are some things that you know like just work and make you feel like you're attending a good meeting. And when I think of sort of elements of a good meeting, even before we kind of go through what you're seeing here on the slide, I always think of that question of like, does this need to be a meeting? Could have this been an email? And I think we ask ourselves that question all the time. And so I think, and we're going to go through this later on today, is really what should you be asking yourself? What are some things that you need to be doing to be prepping for your meeting or your training or event? And what are ways that we can kind of think through this so you've got all the things that you need in place. And so to continue on that thread of elements of a good meeting, we're going to go through some of these things. So create a welcoming environment. And so one of the ways that we like to think about this and talk about this is modeling, right? We want to model what we want to see from our participants, right? And so if we want folks to be present, if we want folks to be engaging with our material, that's going to come right at the top of your meeting, right? If people are coming in and you're distracted or you're quiet or you're not there, you're showing up late, that's going to affect the whole vibe of your meeting. And so we want to start strong right at the top. We want folks to feel welcome, to feel listened to feel heard as much as we can. And so you'll notice that at the top of this particular training, we wanted to play some music as folks were coming in, right? We wanted folks to encourage folks to do what they needed to do before we kind of landed in this space together. So we invite folks to use the restroom, grab a coffee, grab your breakfast. We want folks to be okay with having pets in the background and your partners and your kids, because this is where we are now, and that's okay. So we want people to feel like, as much as we can, we want people to feel connected and welcome in this space. And so we like to think about, what is that opening? So we encourage you to steal all of these things. Please feel free. And for those of you that might have missed it in the chat box, that was the Guardians of the Galaxy soundtrack that we were sharing at the beginning of the training. So we recommend for you to, put your own spin on how you want to welcome folks into your training. And music is a great way to kind of break that ice and have people come in that specific vibe or theme. I can't tell you how many trainings we did where we didn't have music right at the beginning when we were just doing remote, and it was just like silence, because we would mute ourselves and we'd just be looking at people and then we'd be like, welcome, and then mute, and then like, hello, we'll get started in a few minutes, and mute, and it's kind of awkward. And so we found that through trial and error, music was a great way to do that. So just wanted to name that up top and pay attention to what we've got going on in the chat box. And for those of you asking about the PowerPoint, we sent it out in an email yesterday. If you didn't get it, or if you can't find it, let us know. We'll make sure we'll get it to you. We won't be so we'll be continuing to share our screen so you can see our slides as we move along, but you're welcome to kind of follow along on your own if you find that better as well. We wanted to make sure that you have access, and the slides that we shared are for both day 1 and day 2. And then in a little bit, we're going to be doing some breakout rooms, and we're going to be using some Google slides. So more to come on that as well. Awesome. So after we've created a wonderful environment, people are excited and pumped to be here. We also want to make sure that we're modeling these meeting elements, the way that we're kind of functioning together and holding space as a group. And we did that with this group by putting together group agreements and, getting folks to agree to these group agreements, the way that we're going to hold space, our rules, how we're going to be with one another. We know that that's best practice. It works in all spaces, whether we're online, in person, or hybrid. And so we encourage folks to do that as well. In an ideal world, we would work with our group to create the group agreements right from scratch, instead of having a slide that has pre-approved group agreements. But for the sake of training and time and making sure that we get to the content, we sometimes will do that for groups like this, where we're not meeting on a consistent basis. We're only doing 2 of these training sessions. Then we'll have kind of these pre-approved or like ready to go group agreements for folks to chime in on. And if there were additions to those group agreements, we could also add them on the slide and make sure that they make their way on there as well. So just another best practice as well. And then a theme that you'll notice as we go through these training is this third bullet point here. We're talking about elements of a good meeting. Roles are key. That's one of the ways that we've been able to successfully manage big meetings like this. So we had 120 people registered for this training. But because we're free trainings, we never really know how many people are going to show up, how many people are going to drop off. So right now we've got 75 folks. And so in order to manage a crowd like that, right, and even more if we had more folks, we want to make sure that we have designated roles for everybody in this space, especially the folks here on our team. So you'll notice Tanayo and I are co-facilitating today and sort of switching on and off depending on the content and what we've got going on. We have Jasper, who is our wonderful tech person, kind of handling all the tech issues and things that might come up, helping us do breakout rooms, dropping questions and things in the chat box and monitoring if anybody has any tech issues. And then Kelly is sort of like our host. So Kelly did our introductions, also chiming in the chat box as well. Kelly's the one sharing the slides. So as a facilitator, I can look at my notes and make sure that I'm paying attention to what it is that I want to say, hitting all my bullet points, because I don't have to share my screen. For those of you that have shared your screen, you know it kind of takes up your whole, I don't have two screens, I only have one. It takes up your whole screen, so you can't see notes when you're sharing your screen. And for me as a facilitator, I know that's vital. I want to be able to see my notes. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. So we find that having these roles makes our meetings, trainings, events really, really successful because we know we've got a team that we can lean on. So that's certainly a best practice for us as we're putting together our meetings as well. So I'm seeing lots of action in the chat box. So I'm going to pause here to see if I missed anything. Wonderful, wonderful. Let's see what else is going on here. Oh, I hate when the chat box kind of becomes really tiny. So I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Great. This is awesome. Got it. Folks are getting the PowerPoints. Yes, great. Awesome. If there are any questions that come up as we're talking, one of the things that I suffer from as a facilitator is fast talking. So if I'm talking too fast, you're like, Gina needs to slow down. Feel free to tell me to slow down and I will do so. And then the last couple of points here on this elements of a good meeting is really thinking through those actionable pieces that you all mentioned when you were talking about like the last meeting you went to that you felt like was productive. Like you want to make sure that when you're going to a meeting or when you're hosting a meeting, that there are things that the group that's coming together are tasked to do, whether it's making decisions, whether it's sort of building relationship, creating a team, right? Building some of those group dynamics or addressing some of those dynamics that come up when we're bringing folks together, and that there's an action that you're doing in the meeting or an action that you're following up on or something that's going to come out of this meeting that's going to help you at your next meeting, that you're not just coming together for the sake of coming together. That whole question of like, should this be a meeting or should this be an email? These are some of the questions that you need to start asking yourself as you're trying to figure out, okay, how can I make this a good use of someone's time? It feels productive. And what does it look like? So I'm going to pause right there to see if there are any questions. Like Tanayo, I also appreciate a little bit of silence to create space for others. Thank you, Desiree. She's saying I talk fast too. Especially when I get in my element and then I'm like, da, 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 and then my hands come into play. Oh man. Awesome. All right. So I think we're ready to go to the next slide. Wonderful. So part of and sort of the secret sauce of this sort of making a good meeting, right, is the way that you approach your meeting. So your facilitation is going to be a part of what makes your meeting good or not. So who are you as a facilitator? What does that mean? What are you bringing into the space, leading your group through the meeting and the things that you're doing? So when I think about facilitation, the word facilitation comes from the word fácil in Spanish, which means easy. So how are you making whatever it is that you're doing with your group easier? How are you leading your group through this process so that you're making decisions together, you're facilitating the way in which you move through those action items? And there's 3 points here, but again, this is not an exhaustive list. But when we think about sort of our approaches, we want to make sure that we're being goal oriented. And so all of our trainings actually have objectives, right? We have goals that we want to accomplish, and we want to name them right at the top so people know what they can expect from today's session. Actually, our objectives are for day 1 and day 2. So I think one of our first objectives was to practice facilitation. So we're going to be talking a lot about facilitation and who we are as facilitators, and day 2 is when we're going to get a little bit more into practice and what that looks like. So just a heads up there. And then those action items, again, that we talked about are what we think about when we think about problem solving and being interactive. What are ways that people are being tuned in into the meeting? What are things that you're doing so they feel a part of that? I think someone shared in the chat box that like people online, they find that it's hard to connect. And, you know, when they're doing activities, they don't feel as connected of like folks that are in the room doing the actual thing. So like as a facilitator, what are ways that you can think ahead, right? That you can be like, okay, if I know that this is something that I'm going to be doing, how can I make it worthwhile for the folks that are online and the folks in the room? What does it look like? Or perhaps how does it look different? So that I can make sure that I'm engaging my people, that they're feeling like they can be interactive and yeah, connected to what it is that we're trying to do. So just to give you a little bit of an example, I'm going to ask us to go to the next slide. So this is an example of that sort of goals that we talked about. So we call them objectives, but they're essentially the same thing. Sorry, I just realized you all can see my missing nail. I distracted myself. So this is just a quick example of some of those clear goals. There are different models for writing kind of Joe's like, we couldn't see it, but now we can because you pointed it out. How to write clear goals. And so you have an example of a vague goal. How can we engage more community members? Something that's kind of a little bit better. How can we increase attendance in coalition meetings? That's a way of engaging folks, right? And then the best option being, how can we increase attendance in coalition meetings that's reflective of our community by the next fiscal year? So for those of you that are familiar with SMART goals, that best option is, to me, is a SMART goal because you're being really specific, you're naming what it is that you're trying to do, and then you're giving yourself kind of a deadline, right? We want to do this thing, this particular thing by this time. And then you measure yourself from under your goals. Did we accomplish what we said we were going to accomplish? If we did, awesome, yay. And if we didn't, like, what could we do to figure that out? So just some quick kind of run through of those slides to give you a sense of what we mean by facilitation, how we think through the elements of a good meeting. And a lot of it is going to rely on you, right? As the person that's kind of leading through this process. And so part of that is probably the reason you're here today, right? You're building up your skills, you're trying to build your knowledge and like how to navigate these spaces in a way that makes sense. So in a second, we're going to give you some reflection time. But I want to, sorry, I've been doing a lot of talking and I want to bring up my notes just to make sure I didn't miss anything as we're talking here. But yeah, I think I got everything. But I will invite Tanayo to share. Is there anything else that I might have missed from our notes here before we get into our next piece?
No, I don't think so. I think you hit all the big points.
Awesome. So if you are the person leading this group, right, you're trying to put together this meeting, you're trying to do all these things and build your own skills, then let's think about who you are as a facilitator. Tanayo mentioned this at the beginning of the training, right? We're going to give you some time to reflect on who you are. And here are our examples here, right on the bottom to get you started. So you're going to be thinking about what is your presence? What is your style? And then if you were to pick an animal to represent who you are, what would that be? Just to add a little bit of fun and to really kind of get you thinking through and reflecting what you bring to the space as a facilitator. So Tanayo's examples here on the bottom. Tanayo is a humorist sometimes, silence dweller, and identifies strongly with large felines. And then my example is I feel like, and you can let me know if this is wrong, if you have a different perception of me as a facilitator, but I feel like a calm silence dweller as well. I appreciate silence. And I identify with a chipmunk, very small little animal there. I come in a small package, but really just to take this time to think about the energy that you're bringing into your space, your presence, how it is that you want to approach the meetings that you are facilitating. And then again, sort of, if you were to pick an animal to represent who you are in front of the room, what would that be? And again, this is just an example. You feel free to kind of take it wherever it is you want to go. We're going to give you some time to do some reflection. So I'm going to invite Jasper to play some music. If it's easy for you, feel free to grab a pen and a paper to write it down, jot it in a little Word document. Really take this time to answer these questions for yourselves. And then we're back and hopefully maybe hear from one or two folks before we go into our second breakout room. So I'm going to, yep, we stopped sharing. Awesome, wonderful. So when you're ready, Jasper, please feel free to share. Whoever's sharing sound, go for it. Or pause. Thank you all for taking time. All right, let me see what we've got going on here. This is awesome. I saw them coming in as you all were sharing, and I was catching up on my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything. But this is wonderful. Mythical creatures. Hammy from Over the Hedge, specifically voice acted by Steve Carell. Oh my God, this is hilarious. I love this. Calm and happy style. Another lioness in the room. I love it. Chameleon, change the energy and style to promote comfort and participation. That is awesome. I love that. Polar bear, I'm a polar bear specifically. Ooh, yep, other folks loving chameleon. Organized animal whale. These are awesome. I love this. Is there anybody that wants to share out loud sort of what came to mind? I know you all sharing in the chat box, please do. Anyone want to share out loud kind of what came to mind as you were reflecting on these questions? So we can get other voices besides myself.
Hi, my name is Jessica. I'll share.
Yeah.
So it took me a while to think about this because it really depends on the stakeholder group that we're convening and what role I play. But I think I selected like that I'm calm and I'm a silence breaker. So I was thinking of the context of facilitating our overdose fatality review team meetings. And so I often have to break the silence and encourage our participants and stakeholders to speak up and to share their experience. And then I think I chose a dog, like, because I guess I see myself as like leading the path to like specific goals and objectives that we have set. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. I love that. I love that you're sort of bringing up the idea that it depends on who it is that you're facilitating with, what group it is that you're leading, because I find that that's very true for me as well in the different groups that I lead, and the importance of sort of adjusting your energy based on what it is that you're trying to do. So when it comes to these online spaces, as someone who's been facilitating for a really long time, one of the things that I love about facilitation is the energy that I'm able to draw from my group. And that looks very different online than it used to in person, right? And so because I don't have the ability to kind of see where people are at as I would when I was in the room. So like online, I have to sort of turn myself up, I feel like 150% in order to get sort of that energy across that I'm trying to portray, and then really think about what are ways that I can invite people to kind of do the same, to bring their own thoughts. And it's about creating that space, right? What does that look like? What am I bringing to it? How am I welcoming others in? Of questions am I asking? What activities are we doing? So it's all those pieces that we talked about, those elements of a good meeting, and asking myself those in preparation for my meeting, and being really intentional about all those elements, and what I decide to bring in and who I decide to be in that moment and the type of energy that I try to bring. So Jessica, thank you for sharing that. And thank you all for dropping all of your wonderful descriptions in your chat box, for renaming yourselves, for those of you that added your animal there, and caught that silent instruction that we added to it as well. Appreciate you all and want you to bring that energy for the rest of the meeting. So feel free to be your lioness, dragon, chameleon selves as we continue to go on through the training as well. So with that being said, we are going to do a couple of things. We are going to do another breakout room, and you're going to do some brainstorming, but we are going to add another element of interaction. So we are going to be brainstorming in Google Slides. So we're sharing PowerPoint slides, and that's what's going to continue on throughout the training. But the Google Slides is where you all as a group will get a chance to type in and brainstorm in a shared document. So you'll be able to see what other folks are doing, what folks in your team are adding to the brainstorm as well. So I think we have the brainstorm instructions on the next slide. Is that right? Maybe? Yes. So this is what you're going to be brainstorming. What makes a good facilitator? So we just talked about who we are as a facilitator, what type of energy and vibe we're bringing into the space with, and what kind of animal we identify as. And so when you're thinking about what makes a good facilitator, I want you to brainstorm all the things that come to mind. So it could be similar to what you were thinking about for yourself as a facilitator, but it could be something different, right? And we're going to give you some time to do that in a small group. The small groups are going to be a little bit bigger than the introduction groups. And then in your small group, we're going to ask you to pick a facilitator. So somebody who's going to help sort of move the conversation along. And then we're going to ask you to pick a note taker, somebody that's going to be typing in the slides and capturing all the thoughts that your group comes up with for the brainstorm. And then you're going to pick somebody to share back. So when we come back to the large group, we're going to ask a few groups to share out loud their top 2 highlights. What are the top 2 things that really resonated with you, or top 2 themes that came up as you were brainstorming? What makes a good facilitator? And be as specific as you want here. Like there's no sort of limiting the size of your brainstorm, like throw anything that comes to mind up there. And then you can sort of hone in when we ask you to share what those highlights are. Again, you are going to be doing that in the Google Docs. Jasper dropped the link in the chat box. So if you are having trouble with the link, let us know. In your small group, as long as 1 or 2 people can access that link, I think you should be okay. If you're on a phone and for some reason you don't want to click on another link that takes you outside of your Zoom, we totally understand. But as long as a few folks in your small breakout room can access those Google Slides, you should be okay. And we've given you some instruction on who to pick as a facilitator and a note taker. Those are just suggestions, so you don't spend 20 minutes figuring out who's going to be doing what. But if you want to throw that out the window and do your own thing, you're also welcome to do that as well. We just want to make it easy for folks as you do this breakout room. So before we break you out and open the rooms, does anybody have any questions about these instructions? You can't access the slides from the link, Diane. All right.
No, for some reason it gives me an error. It says keep reloading.
Bummer. I think sometimes this is what happens. This happens when I work with the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, is that their servers block Google Slides, so they're not able to access them or use them. So
neither can I.
Yeah, so sometimes that comes up. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask Jasper to open the breakout rooms. If you go into your breakout room and nobody can access the slides or can see the Google Slides, I want you to click the little ask for help button. But as I mentioned, as long as 1 or 2 folks can access them, they should be able to capture your thoughts. And if you want to get fancy with it, folks that are in the breakout room with you can also share their screen so you can see it that way.
Okay. Thank you.
Sound for folks. Awesome. Great. All right, Jasper, I think we're ready to go. Let's send people off into breakout rooms. So you should have got a pop-up. Feel free to click in when you are ready. Love the robot voice. All right. Folks are trickling in and they've officially been kicked out. So my cue is to watch that participant count because it went from 20 something to 60 something very quickly. So now I know that the rooms are officially closed and folks are back in the main space. So thank you all for taking the time to brainstorm and have a chat as a small group. I know that wasn't a lot of time, and had we had more time, I'm sure you could have kept going. But one of the things I shared in the large group for the folks that stayed behind that weren't able to join a breakout room is that one of the reasons we use Google Slides in small breakout rooms is, as a facilitator, it's a way for us to track progress, like how folks are moving along in the conversation, as long as they're taking notes in there. If not, then we really have no idea. We just hope for the best. But Google Slides is just another tool that we use when we're not able to be in each small group for us to gauge, okay, how are they doing? Do we need to give them more time? Are folks understanding what we're asking them to do? And if they're in there for a long time and no one's responded to the question, then we're like, okay, then maybe we need to resend the instructions so folks kind of get the idea of what it is we're asking them to do. So we are sharing our screen. I know we had some technical difficulties of some folks not being able to access the Google Slides. So I'm going to ask a couple of groups to kind of share back to see what folks talked about in their brainstorms, and just wanted to share folks what they look like, share with the folks who can't see what they look like, and for them to get a chance to see what it is that you all chatted about. So why don't we hear from group one? What are a couple of highlights from your conversation that you all talked about when it comes to what makes a good facilitator?
Okay, that's me. So in our group, we came up with a number of different things, but the two highlights would be one, that the facilitator really needs to be good at reading the room and reading the Zoom. And that's really tricky because it's easy if you're all Zoom to read all Zoom, or if you're all in person. So sometimes it's difficult if you're in a room with people to also remember that you have Zoom or remote participants. So one of the things we thought of was maybe having another role, somebody in charge of like just keeping track of the people on Zoom. Are they raising their hands? And just saying, oh, to the facilitator, we have somebody on Zoom who would like to interact, or something like that. Someone whose job it is to keep track of the people that are remote. And then the other thing was like doing a lot of pre-planning. The facilitator should pre-plan, maybe do dry runs to try to work out any kinks that might come up during the meeting.
I love that. Thank you so much, group one, and Joanne for sharing for your group those two highlights. Lots of wonderful ideas. Before I share sort of my own reflections and thoughts, I would love to hear from a couple of other folks, and then we can kind of move on to the next section. But why don't I hear from group 4? Can you all share?
Yep, that's me. Hi, my name is Kelsey. So I was in group 4. We talked about similar to what Joanne mentioned and what you all have talked about today, like having multiple people, like multiple facilitators with clearly delineated roles. So having basically a Zoom facilitator and an in-person facilitator. And we also just talked about, I guess, kind of multitasking and the importance of like being attentive and prioritizing the participants who are on Zoom, equally as the participants who are in person. I think when you're an attendee on Zoom and maybe a lot of the other attendees are in person and, only a handful are on Zoom, I think it's pretty easy to feel left out or not prioritized, or it's harder to speak up. And to really putting in maybe a little bit of extra effort to engage the Zoom group at times when it kind of feels like, you know, they've been silent.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Group 4, and Kelsey for sharing from Group 4. So a lot of similar ideas in Group 1 and really thinking about what are those things that we have to balance as we're facilitating these hybrid spaces. Wonderful. Okay, one more group. Let's see, Group 11. What did you all talk about? What are some highlights from your conversation?
Hi, it's Jess again. So I'll choose two of them, and again, it has a lot to do with just managing the room. But we said a facilitator would need to kind of orient. This it's the first bullet, but orient the participants regarding like who is attending virtually, who is in person. You know, are the microphones working? Where to speak into the microphone, depending on your audio visual setup. Where the screen is, if there's a camera on, you know, like just orienting people. And then the second one was, the second one I wanted to pull up was listening to participants. And again, someone else mentioned it too, but like engaging those who are attending virtually and then those who are in person, and just checking in and making sure you're also communicating with those attending virtually.
Awesome. Thank you, Group 11 and Jessica for naming those. Lots of great tips in there and a lot of things for us to consider and really ask ourselves what is, okay, so first of all, I just got a low battery warning, so I'm going to plug in my computer so I don't disappear, which has happened in way too many meetings, more than I'd like to admit, to be quite honest. All right, I'm plugged in, good to go. Sorry, I just had a panic moment in there. Lots of good tips and ideas. And like I said, a lot of considerations and things that we're asking ourselves as facilitators before we even start our meeting or think about what it is that we want to add into what we're going to be talking about with whatever group that we're going to be meeting with, right? And so it begs us to really think about all the things that we've chatted about so far, right? Who we are as a facilitator, what are our skills, who are the people that we're going to be connecting with, what platforms they're going to be joining us from. So lots of great questions, and you all are sort of forecasting all the things that we're hoping to cover in today's session and really ask ourselves. So I think this is a really great start to that conversation. And something somebody said, I think it was you, Kelsey, that shared, or I actually don't remember who said it now, but acknowledging who's online versus who's in person. So I'm going to ask Kelly to take us to our next slide on the PowerPoint here, is that there are lots of questions that we're going to be asking ourselves. And as we're navigating all of these platforms and all of these spaces, what's the difference, or what are some things that come to mind when we're thinking about, okay, is this meeting in person? Is this meeting online? Is this a hybrid situation? And then sort of what's similar in all three. And so I'm not going to read everything on this slide, but I am going to highlight what's in the hybrid column here, right? And so one of the best practices one you all talked about as in your small group brainstorms is that, yes, you should probably, it is, I would say, a best practice to have an in-person facilitator and an online facilitator for the very reason you all are mentioning. You want to make sure that your participants are feeling included in the conversation, right? And so it is a difficult task for the in-person facilitator to not only be paying attention to the folks that are in the room, but also the folks online. So you want to be doing temperature checks, and what does that look like? And how are you communicating with your co-facilitator so you're able to gauge how the vibe is going, how people are interacting and connecting in order to have a successful meeting. So yes, those roles are really important. And if you have it, then yes, have somebody in person and online. And the idea that you need more prep time than other formats, because you're balancing two different things. You're having an online meeting and you're having an in-person meeting. So what does that mean? And so there's no one right answer, right? So it's going to look different for me than it does for you, especially because my groups are going to be different than yours. So you have to ask yourselves, who is it that I'm asking to come to my meeting? What am I asking them to do there? And if we're going to be online and in person, it keeps merging as inline, which is not a word, but, or it is, but anyways, What are some things that I need to be paying attention to when it comes to my in-person space versus my online space? And those questions, again, are going to look different for you as a facilitator, depending on where it is that you're doing and what it is that you're doing. And that the end all be all is really, you're going to be reliant a lot on your technology. So you want to make sure that you have a strong Wi-Fi connection, that you have good audio, and that you have backup plans when those things are not working as you had envisioned. And so we've already run into some tech issues, right? We've got people that access our Google Slides, so we tried to work it out in the moment. For some reason, Zoom is not letting us share slides and sound from two different people. And so in the chat box a little bit earlier, somebody said, can you share the slide as we were doing that self-reflection? Can you share that slide one more time? Had to stop the music, share the slide, and then start the music after we stopped sharing that slide, which would have been kind of a rough transition, but we figured it out. The person that was asking for the slide was able to access the PowerPoint, but these are just things that come up. Even though we planned and thought in the background that we had set up the Zoom so we could do both things at the same time, for some reason that's not working for us. So we'll have to go back and revisit what's happening. What is it that we need to be looking at and reworking again so that we can plan ahead for next time. So lots of different elements. So I'm actually going to zoom through some of these next slides because you all have already talked about this. And so when you are a facilitator, what makes a good facilitator? One of the things that comes up for us is really thinking about content versus process. Content being the what it is that you're doing, and process being the how it is that you are doing it. So if you are bringing up some subjects for discussion, if you're arising problems that need to be solved, if there's a goal that you're working on that you want to bring the group together to discuss, that's the content of your meeting. And then there are all kinds of methods and things that you can do on the how is it that you're going to have this conversation? What tools or activities are you going to use to get to that goal of that content that you're trying to accomplish during your meeting time? And some of the things that you need to consider are what those methods look like, right? What tools are being used, how folks are going to access those tools, and then the group dynamics that are at play, which is going to depend on who it is that's in your group. Do they know each other? Is it a new group? Have they only met online? Have they only met in person? And now we're in this weird in-between space. So these are all the things that you're going to consider. And as you're planning your agenda as a facilitator, things that you're going to think about as you're prepping for your meeting. Prep, as you all mentioned, is really important. A hybrid meeting is not the meeting that you want to throw on your calendar last minute because you're like, oh, I need to talk to these people. Because we understand that there's a lot of things to consider, a lot of questions that you need to be asking yourself, and a lot of preparation that you need to do in order to have a successful meeting. So allowing yourself the time to really have those conversations with folks and answer those questions is really important. We're going to move on to the next slide. Process tools. And so we just finished doing some brainstorming. This was our way of getting as many ideas in a very short amount of time as possible, and then hearing from folks what they thought. And so we used the process tool of brainstorming as a way to have that conversation. But there are other methods of having conversations, like visioning, where you have folks kind of creating an ideal picture of what it is that you're trying to accomplish. You have some straw polling to help you with some decision making. General kind of small group work, so taking a big, large group and breaking them into small groups to have smaller conversations, kind of like what we did right at the top, right? We wanted to hear from you all. We wanted you all to connect with each other, and you did some small group stuff. And it was really just a way for folks to kind of get their voice into the room that wasn't this big, large group of 60 some odd people. Individual work, reflection work, we find sometimes is really helpful, just a time to kind of sit with your self to answer questions before you share in a large group or a small group is another sort of process tool, another way to have the conversation or to get folks prepped for the conversation, especially if you have folks in the room that are not big sharers, that are not, prone to unmuting themselves and sharing out loud. Allowing people to prep their thoughts ahead of time, I find is really, really helpful. As somebody who identifies as a quieter participant, when I am in a training or in a meeting, when somebody gives me time to do some self-reflection or puts me in a small group to think about the answer to a question before we discuss as a large group, that's going to make it easier for me to share in the large group because I have time to kind of think through, okay, this is what I'm going to say. I don't have to be nervous. Which happens, like we all get nervous when we're in large groups, right? Some people feel more comfortable than others. So what are ways that we can make people feel more comfortable in this space? And some of those process tools are ways that we can do that. And pair work is another way of doing that as well. So no, go ahead, Kelly. You're welcome to go to the next slide. And all of this to say that this is all part of you building your toolbox as a facilitator, right? We're adding all of our questions in there. We're trying to figure out who we are as a facilitator. We're using our process tools. We want to make sure that we're considering our goals or making goals for what it is that we're trying to do at each meeting. And then these are sort of another more tools to add to your toolbox here. Another way to sort of process out loud with your group or in small groups or quietly what it is that you're trying to do. So asking questions is another way to get folks to be involved in the conversation. And this one sometimes can be really hard. I identify as somebody who struggles because I often ask really broad, vague questions just to get kind of folks thinking through. But sometimes that's not the easiest thing to ask when you're in an online space because people are like, do I answer? Do I unmute? Do I add it to the chat box? Really often I'm just kind of asking these questions to get folks like their juices flowing in their brain and I don't really expect an answer. But if you are wanting folks to participate in a large group conversation, the more specific you can be with your question, the easier it's going to be for folks to answer it, right? Because people, you know, if you're asking, what did you think about this? Okay, that's that's what folks are going to respond to, right? As opposed to like, what are your feelings? You know what I mean? Silence is another tool. It's one of my favorite tools because I am not afraid of an awkward silence. Sometimes I am like, all right, folks, what do we think? And no one pipes up and I sort of just name, okay, I'm going to be quiet for the next 30 seconds. If no one really wants to say anything, then we're just going to sit in silence together. But oftentimes there are folks like, okay, here's my moment. I really want to say this thing, or I really want to ask this question. So why don't I, thank you, Jill. I just saw that pop up. So I'm just going to take the time to step into this silence that the facilitator is creating. As somebody that also struggles with speaking fast, it can be really hard to like pause and remind myself to be like, all right, I need to stop. And remember that this is a tool in my toolbox. I can create the silence, but in order to do that, I have to stop talking, right? And so we do that intentionally. And we say that in a way that's like, okay, I'm going to give us kind of 10 seconds, folks, to answer that question. I'm going to pause here and pause. And in your mind, you got to count to 10, 20, whatever, however it is that, however long you want to keep the silence for, but allowing that space for folks to do that. And again, referring back to the process tools, being able to pull it out of your back pocket. If you're trying to have a large group conversation and folks are not responding to your questions, they sat in awkward silence and still didn't say anything, then you're like, okay, I'm going to put you into small groups. I want you all to chat in small groups. And then come back and share it to the large group. And maybe that'll get some more voices into the room. So these are all tools that we have in our facilitator toolbox that sometimes some can be harder than others to pull out, but sort of paying attention to what it is that we're trying to do and reminding ourselves that we're people. And, you know, it's sometimes good to have a visual like this on a slide to be like, all right, now I'm going to stop talking. So before we head on into the next section, does anyone have any questions, thoughts, or reflections? I'm going to read through the chat box and allow you all to unmute yourselves if there are any burning things that folks want to say out loud. Go for it.
Hi, Gina, can you hear me okay?
I can, yes.
I just wanted to give a shout out. Catherine Dingra is on this call too, and she runs a really great, bless you, Melanie, I'm in here with a coworker. She runs a really great hybrid coalition meeting every month, and not just the agenda Catherine does, but also she works in partnership with Wakefield Cable Access TV. So they kind of are her free support system for setting up a hybrid meeting. So I just wanted to throw that out there to people who may not have an in-organization kind of tech person like Jasper at their disposal, you know, just to reach out to your local cable access TV stations to see if they can assist.
What does that assistance look like?
They set up our community meeting room for us, but also they run the Zoom. So they have a big TV and have kind of the gallery view for Catherine as she's facilitating, and I'm the note taker. And so it kind of, I think mostly our tech support, they play the tech support role, but also provide the in-person space. So just check with your local TV stations. They may be happy to assist in that way too.
Awesome. Thank you, Kara, for sharing. I love that. I had not heard that that was a resource. So I'm glad that you put that out there for folks to just think about if that's something that your local town offers. It could be a great way to make a partnership, right? And to lean on the resources that are available to the community, and lots of ideas in the chat box as well. Jen, I saw you raised your hand, so feel free to jump in there.
Yeah, it wasn't anything super deep, but I guess I just like to be transparent when I'm like, you know, if things are going wrong, like if I prepped as much as I can and things are going wrong with any meeting, or if things get stuck, I'm usually just like, instead of like going internal like I used to, I just kind of like say like, okay, this is awkward. This is what's happening. What can we do? You know, so kind of just like talk myself through it, and it just like decreases my anxiety about like, you know, the whole, you know, house of cards falling or whatever.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I think one of the thing that this online space forces us to do is to do some of that processing out loud, right? We don't have, if we were in person, there are times where I kind of take a moment to myself, or I excuse myself to the restroom. I'll be back while you all work, and kind of take a moment, right? Or I might do a little side conversation with my co-facilitator and say, oh, this activity is not really going as well as I thought it would, or something's happening here and I'm not sure what to do, and sort of have a little mini conference. But that's not as easy to do in this online space, because you're constantly on, your camera's on, people are looking to you as the facilitator for like, what's next, what's going to happen next. And so those moments happen out loud. And so encouraging you all to sort of really think about what that looks like for you. And so thank you, Jen, for offering that, like, yeah, saying like, this is awkward, or this is not working. So let's like reevaluate as a group and figure out how to move forward. That's a great conversation to have out loud, right? Leaning on those process tools of like, I am going to vocalize what is happening here. And then I'm going to allow my group to say like, how are we going to figure this out? A great way to have that conversation with folks. And if for some reason you're like, oh, I don't know if I could do that as a facilitator, what are some other tools that you can think about? Throw people in a breakout room if you need a minute to like regroup yourself. Be like, all right, I'm going to put you into small groups to do this thing or to answer this question. And give yourself a moment in the main room to gather yourself with your co-facilitators if you have other folks in the room, or invite folks to turn their cameras off and take a moment. Whatever it is that you need to do, these are all really good tools and ways to gather your thoughts, right? And get yourself together before you move on to the next thing, should those needs arise for yourself as a facilitator. And thinking about what that could look like in a hybrid space too. So if you're online and your online facilitator is having trouble, and if you're in person and you're having trouble in person, being honest about that as well, and figuring it out. Tonight I'll mention this as we were kind of moving along, is we're not experts in this field. We're trying to figure it out just as much as you all are. As an organization, we're having conversations within our own department, like what do our hybrid meetings look like? What are things that are working really well that we can add to this training? But what are some things that we're still trying to figure out? And one of the tips that I meant to share earlier, and then of course lost my train of thought, was that when we do have hybrid meetings, when we're having folks that are in the room and folks joining us online, because we have folks joining us from all over the country, is that oftentimes when we're in our in-person folks are bringing their laptops. So they are also a square in this space, in this Zoom space. So they're not just like all together in a room and you have one camera for the room, but everybody is still having their laptop able to engage in this space so that they can be seen. And there's not as much delineation between who's in person and who's online. That's just kind of one way that we've tried to mitigate some of that disconnect that happens between in person and online, is like making sure that folks can maintain their square and people can at least see your face and know that you are in the room and that you're able to share. What comes with that though, is that oftentimes it could add to your audio issues, right? If people are muting and unmuting and there are a number of you in the room at the same time and are joining from the laptops, that can add some other tech issues as well, which we're still trying to figure out as an organization. Like, how do we make sure that we remember how to function in person while also engaging folks online? So yeah, we're still trying to figure it out. We're going to share as much as we can here in this space and what's working. But yeah, feel free to continue to share in the chat box and ask questions. Margaret is asking, when you do that, Gina, do the people who are in person feel like it's worth being there, or if they're just on their computer anyway? I think it's a great question. I think, and I'll say for myself, when I'm mostly remote, but I am allowed to go into the office and host meetings in there. And so one of the meetings that we did recently was our departmental retreat. And it was a 2-day retreat. And day one, I decided that I'm going into the office. I know that there are a couple of people in there, but we did just that. Everyone joined from their own space. So Tanayo was on her computer. I was in like a little conference room. And then one of our other directors was in their office. So I recognize that the reason we have that as a best practice is that so everyone feels included. So it made sense to me, like I knew the reasoning behind it. And then afterwards, once the meeting was over, I was able to have lunch with a couple of my coworkers. So I found that it was worth it because I knew that that's sort of what was coming afterwards. But yeah, Tanayo, I don't know if you want to share sort of what your thoughts were.
Sure, although Margaret, it looks like you have your hand up. You can go first. If you want to jump in.
I guess I was more imagining a meeting where you have some people in person around a table, but they all have computers in front of them in order to include the people who are remote. Like we discussed this in our small group. I don't want people walking away from that going, I could have just done this from home, you know?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think for me, most of this context comes from really before the pandemic. So before everything shut down, I was fully in person. A lot of our organization was, but we do have staff that are consistently remote that live in different places. And so what we would do is bring our laptops into the room. And then we would use the conference room technology to sort of hold the meeting, but we would have our faces up on our individual laptops so that people weren't just looking at like the one like far off camera that just shows like the full room view. So for me in that context, I found that to be really helpful. Maybe not so much for me as the in-person person, but for folks that were remote, a lot of times they'd say that was so much nicer because I could actually see your face and I wasn't staring at a room really far away. So I think, again, it depends on your context. It depends on what you're trying to do. But I think it's, if you have access, if you have the money for that, it's really helpful to be able to like have that connection as much as you can. And flamboyant cuttlefish, you raised your hand. I think that's Joy, but I like flamboyant cuttlefish better.
I like flamboyant cuttlefish.
I am okay with flamboyant cuttlefish being like I wanted to push back against, so I might as well just have done this from home as a privileged take. And speaking not in my professional role, but in my personal role as a person living with a mobility impairment, a lot of meetings prior to the pandemic were inaccessible to me and other members of the disability community. And if we could have attended online, our voices would have been in those meetings. And so I think if you do have constituents giving that kind of feedback to a meeting, it's really important to sort of challenge them on that and say like, okay, well, if you could have done this at home, you could have done this at home. And you'd still have attended, and you're telling me that you would have gotten as much out of this, but there are people in this room who would not be able to be here in person. And if we take away the hybrid element of this, we are leaving those people behind. And to sort of recognize that kind of feedback is coming from a privileged perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, for your comments. No, I appreciate that. Sorry, did I cut you off?
That was my rant. Thank you.
No, thank you. And I appreciate you sort of bringing that up. Part of what I was going to say in response to the question too, is that, and similar to what Tanayo shared as well, it just depends on your goal and what it is that you're trying to accomplish, right? So if the purpose of the meeting is not, or if what you're trying to accomplish will not benefit from having folks in person, then why are you holding a hybrid meeting, right? Why not just make it online? These are the questions that we need to ask ourselves. So if folks are saying, oh, I could have just attended this online because I didn't get anything from the in-person element, then that's when you say, okay, maybe we should just have an online meeting, right? We're not inviting folks into the room. There's not a particular reason for it, right? And so you need to ask yourself this question and who your audience is. To Joy's point, like if you have folks that are not able to attend online because they can't access Wi-Fi, they don't have the facilities for it, and an in-person meeting is the only way that they can engage, again, then that makes sense, right? As a facilitator, you're like, all right, if these folks are going to be excluded from the room because I don't have this in-person space, that's something that you need to consider as much as we would consider for the online space as well. So it all depends on your goals, your audience, that list of questions that you're asking yourself before you think about what type of meeting you're going, who's going to be involved, and how they're going to be involved. So I think that's it. Gary, I'm going to let you go ahead, and then we're going to move into our break.
Okay, real quickly, I'm just intrigued, I guess, by the number of people who feel that they need to be in person, that's important for them, whether it's productive or not doesn't seem to matter. It's more of a kind of a social thing. And as I've been in a number of groups and we're making decisions about, is now the time to start meeting together again? I'm typically not inclined to meet in person for safety reasons, but I'm also not sure I always need to be present physically. I feel like I can be present virtually. But it's important for other people just to be present.
It is. And I think, I think it's a question that not only that we're asking ourselves as facilitators, but a question that we're having with the group that we're meeting with, right? Because if we're going to be upholding these group agreements, right, the way that we're holding space together, if part of your group agreements is making sure that we're connecting as a group, building community, what does that look like, right? And it's going to look differently for other people. So what are ways that we can come together as a group to have that conversation and making sure we're meeting people's needs, right? Meeting them where we're at. We talked about that right at the beginning, right? Of what makes a good facilitator and what makes a good meeting is that folks are feeling connected and that they're feeling included. And so that's going to look different for all these different types of groups. And yeah, our preferences are going to be different. So how do you have that conversation with your group when people are feeling differently, and how do you come to a place that makes sense for your specific group? So lots of considerations, and we're going to continue the conversation. But we are going to do a break, and Jasper, I think, is going to give us a little tutorial on how we do that in these online spaces. So I think I'm handing it over to somebody. Jasper, Kelly, Tanayo, anybody. Take it away.
I got you, Gina. So I'll make this a very, very quick tutorial, and then everybody can take a nice break, decompress, rejuvenate, whatever it is that you got to do. So this is the way that I like to do it. I think it's really easy and really a low barrier of entry in terms of like skill and how to do this. Right, so I'll share my screen. You'll see here that I've just got, you know, my browser open. These are our slides. So I will open it up and I will simply Google timer. And there's a couple ones, there's a lot of different results you'll get. I usually just click the first one. And in this case, we're saying, okay, we want to have maybe a 10-minute break. So then that's exactly what I will do. Is I will set a 10-minute timer. And as I'm sharing my screen, you'll see, you know, you can take your break, you'll come back maybe, oh, there's 2 minutes left. So it's very simple, very low tech in terms of, you know, what, you know, tech access you may have. And it also just lets people keep track better of, you know, the amount of time you're giving them. So that's all that is. I'll reset it so you have your 22 seconds back, but that's all that is when we talk about sharing a timer. There's a lot of free ones and you can just share your screen and, you know, use Google to help you with that.
Thank you so much, Jasper. All right, so I'm gonna let you all take your 10-minute break and we'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Feel free to mute yourself, turn your camera off, do what it is that you're gonna do, and we'll be back here in 10 minutes.
We'll start diving back into our content. So Gina set us up super well for this conversation. So thank you all for engaging in our discussion about, you know, facilitation, what makes a good facilitator. So this next piece is going to be a little bit more specific to the hybrid setting. And we're going to invite you to use the annotate function on Zoom, which again is another great way to do engagement if you have folks joining online. So if anyone is unfamiliar with this, the way that you're going to access this annotate function is you're going to look at the top of your screen. I believe Kelly is screen sharing. So you're going to see a green bar that says you are viewing Kelly Dankert's screen. Next to that is a little black box that says view options. So if you click on view options, you're going to get a drop down and you're going to get something that says annotate. It's like 3 or 4 words down. And then you should be seeing a toolbar. If you are not, or you're like, I don't know what she's talking about, I can't find this, that's totally okay. We invite you to also share out loud in this section or in the chat box, however you would like to engage. If you can find the annotate function, we're just going to walk through a couple of considerations that we want to offer in terms of hybrid meetings. So this first one is, when do we make the call to host a hybrid meeting versus an online or an in-person meeting? And some of you have brought up some of these already, but we wanted to do a big group brainstorm and just think about, okay, we have to have this meeting, we have to have this event. When does hybrid make the most sense? So if you can access the annotate, I invite you to start typing up your thoughts. If you want to share in the chat or out loud, please do so. And this can be drawn from your personal experience as well. If you've hosted a hybrid meeting recently, what made you decide that? Was it, you know, logistical considerations? Was it what your organization wanted? Was it what a client wanted? So just things like that. And I'm going to turn off your name so that you can be anonymous as you share. Let's see. Or maybe I can't. Wait, Jasper, are you the host? You might have to do that. Can you disable their names? Thank you. Cool. And just looking at some of these, so location and access, yep, accessibility needs, absolutely. Some folks need the in-person, others need to be home or live far away. Yep, that's definitely the case for us. We have a lot of remote staff, and we also have a large amount of staff in Boston where our offices are located. So sort of by necessity, we have to do a lot of hybrid meetings. I see when people are working in person, but some people are still remote. Yep. Is it the safest choice? What are the needs of participants? Yes, thank you. Absolutely, we should be thinking about safety. We are still in the middle of a pandemic. People are still getting sick. We want to make sure we're taking care of ourselves, of each other, and being as thoughtful as we possibly can. So if we, you know, again, considering, I think what Joy brought up around accessibility, maybe that's privileged, right? Maybe having a hybrid setup is privileged. So what's the safest choice for everybody? And some of these are getting a little bit crunched together, but I see, okay, make it a group decision or vote. I think that's a great idea. Give people a choice, right? Coalition building and logistics. Who needs to be heard? Do we need to have people spending X amount of time traveling? That's a great point. Wow, look at all of these. These are great. I can't keep up. This is amazing. What can we do in hybrid that we can't do virtually? I think that's a really great question. So what is it that this platform is offering us that maybe we can't find in other spaces? Or if we can find it in other spaces, does this make the most sense? Yep, getting lots of voices into the meeting. Let's see. Will it increase attendance? That's a great consideration. I see, just want to make sure I'm not missing the chat box. Yep, social anxiety, fear of being in front of a large group. Absolutely, this can help sort of mediate that. Time and distance. Yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of kind of similar things here. So there's a lot around preference and accessibility. Does it make sense? What is it offering? Is there capacity? Absolutely. This is great. And I think, I don't want to like delete all of your beautiful thoughts. Do you think we can take a screenshot of this page? Jasper, awesome. And after that, simultaneous interpretation available. Yep, absolutely. I just want to make sure I'm not missing the chat. So hybrid is access, complaining about feeling like you chose the wrong one. When you have the capacity to do either is privilege. Making sure no one is left out is key. Absolutely, yeah. So I think this is really what we're getting at here for sure. So thank you so much for naming that. Is hybrid in a lot of ways offers options, right? It gives you the chance to be in person if that's what makes sense for you, if that's accessible for you, if that's feasible for you, and it gives you the option to be in person or to be virtual if it's not possible for you to be in person for whatever reason. So that's why this can be a really, really helpful tool, but it also, again, as Gina mentioned up top, takes a lot more prep. Like there's a lot more things we need to be thinking about. And we're going to get a little bit more into that in these next few questions. So if we can go ahead and clear this slide, that sort of segues into this next consideration. So you mentioned a lot already, but what are some of the logistical considerations when it comes to hybrid setups? You know, what does our agenda look like? What does the facilitator guide look like? Do we have, you know, one for in-person facilitators and one for online facilitators? How are we making sure that we're engaging people across both platforms? You know, where is our space? You know, if we're going to be in person, is that at an office? Is that free to us? Is it somewhere we have to go and rent? Is it somewhere we need to go set up? Is the tech already there? What else should we be thinking about from a logistics standpoint? And I think you named some of these already, but feel free to brainstorm a few more. Second facilitator, yep. How many people are in person versus remote? Absolutely. Where people are located physically, definitely. Youth and adult preferences. Oh, thank you so much for naming that. This project is not youth development based, but we do have quite a few at our organization that support young people and support youth workers. So thank you so much for bringing the youth voice into this space. I really appreciate that. Let's see, do people need to submit vaccine information? Absolutely. That's a huge one. Yep, how are we setting up tech so that people can be heard? Poor internet, absolutely. Yep. Visual challenges, sure. So yeah, exactly. How are we being compliant? How are we meeting 508 compliancy? Do our documents work? How are we sharing them so that everyone can access them? Exactly. Our primary goal is social connection. Participants have a wide range of cognitive needs and limited tech comfort. Yeah, so I think that's really important. So thinking about how are we prepping people, not just ourselves, but how are we prepping participants to be in this space, whether they're in person or online? Do we need to send out, you know, a Zoom tutorial? Or if you're not using Zoom, is it Microsoft Teams? Is it something else? You know, how are we setting people up to succeed, right? You know, we want to make sure that we're not just preparing ourselves, but that all of our participants are able to come into this space however they can, and feel ready to go, ready to participate and not be worried about, you know, can they hear me? Can they see me? How am I going to access these documents? Absolutely. Yep, having multiple co-facilitators, having ASL. Yep, transportation of tech equipment. Absolutely, yeah. We back in the day, we used to do solely in-person trainings, right? And we'd have to transport, you know, the flip chart paper and the projector, which we always forgot, which was very funny, and our laptop, you know, all of that stuff. And Gina's laughing. It's true though. I think we probably left it behind like 3 or 4 times in a row. It's like, what are we doing? So yeah, thinking about how are we getting all of this stuff there, especially if it's heavy, like, do we need to have extra capacity to move it? Who's going to drive it, right? Like, I don't have a car. Kelly is now in Vermont, but she used to be my ride to all of our trainings. Otherwise, there's no way I could have gotten there, right? So how are people getting there? For sure. Promoting confidentiality. Yeah, absolutely. And that's a big thing for sure, especially someone mentioned young people. If we're working with young people or if we're working with adults, not everyone wants you in their space. People are going to leave their cameras off. They're not going to want you to see where they are, what they're doing. So I think it's really important to create that welcoming environment, create that space where people feel like they can join however they want to, and that will be okay. You know, there's not an expectation that everyone has their cameras on, even if we invite you to turn it on, right? So that's great. Thank you for naming that. Awesome. And it seems like we've slowed a little, so if we can screenshot and clear, that would be awesome. And of course, feel free to interrupt me and speak up too. I don't like listening to myself talk, so if anyone wants to share verbally, I really would love to hear you as well.
I have a question about the annotate function. So I've noticed that you cleared each time we went to a new slide. Is it possible when you use this to be able to save what people have besides, well, you did a screenshot. So is that the recommended way to do it? Yeah, so the annotate function is good and bad. So it's great because everyone theoretically can access it and can put their thoughts down all at the same time. But the problem is if you're on PowerPoint, you move to the next slide, all of these notes will still be there, which isn't always the most helpful. So what we asked Jasper to do was just to go into their annotate bar and save the picture. So what we can do is when we send out the slides, we can include those screenshots for you all to see what people were brainstorming. Yeah, thank you, Jill. That was a much more succinct answer. Yeah, that was good. Go ahead, Gina.
I was just going to say it's also saved in the recording because we record all of our training. So if somebody's watching this back, they can see as folks are adding, which I think is pretty cool.
Absolutely. And do you need Zoom Premium to use the annotate button? I don't believe so. I think someone just has to be sharing their screen. Awesome. Why can't you move your comments? So yeah, that's a good question. I can't move the comments, but you I think whoever makes the comment can move it. No, Jill's shaking her head, shaking their head. Okay. Gotcha.
I think once you place it, you're stuck there.
Okay, yeah. Becky, go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to backtrack just 1 second. Something else that we've been thinking about in doing online and hybrid stuff is not just thinking about how can we make sure that we are universally accessible, but also thinking about, does this need to be broken down for target audiences? So we have 20-something languages spoken in Cambridge, more, but we offer programming in that many. And so, we had training or a forum specifically for Bengali speakers. And it was very clear at the onset of who this was for, and where, if that's not you, you can access something for you. So yeah.
No, that's a great point. And if I can ask a follow-up question, is that something that your organization pays for? I'm just wondering about the budgetary part, because I know that when we've done interpreters in the past, it's been a pretty hefty fee. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a few other folks here from my same organization, if they have other experiences. We have a staff of part-time staff that are community members. And so they are trained to lead and compensated for their expertise in that. And so it's it doesn't work in medical situations, but medical interpretation is different, but this is someone that people feel comfortable with and feel like they want to attend and welcome to come.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Were there any other questions? I think I might have missed somebody. Maybe not. Making things up. Okay. And I think, did we skip a slide? If we go back once, we just talked about considerations. Okay. Oh, I see what I did. Okay. So we can go back to the slide before this. That would be awesome. Great. So this was one more consideration I wanted to spend a little bit of time on at the top. So what's unique to your group or situation that needs to be considered before moving forward with your meeting? And we talked about a few of these in terms of logistics, but I'm just curious to hear from you all, again, through annotate, through raising your hand, through the chat box. When you're thinking about yourself, your group, your organization, and hybrid meetings, what are you considering? What's unique to you? Is it, something that needs to be done for a client? Is it something that needs to be done because your organization is demanding it? I'm just curious to hear from the room, sort of, what brought you to this space? Why are you considering hybrid meetings? And Flamboyant Cuttlefish, go ahead.
Hi, yes. So we work with a population that is predominantly Latinx. About 80% of our patients are either Spanish speaking only or prefer Spanish. So there's linguistic considerations, cultural competency considerations. We hire predominantly bilingual staff to sort of address that. But then our clients are also often homeless and don't have access to technology. So one of the things that we've done is set up kiosks in some of our public facing programs so that our outpatient clients who don't have their own access to personal electronic devices can still participate by checking into a private room where they're going to have access to kiosks where they can do telehealth meetings or participate in sobriety groups or things like that that they wouldn't otherwise be able to participate in if they were online only. But I think it's always really, really important to ask the question whenever you're facilitating a meeting is who wouldn't be able to be here given the plan that we have right now? And is it important for those people to be here? And how do we make it possible for them to be here? I really liked what I think it was Melissa said about culturally specific groups. So it's really clear who this group is for, but then how do you consolidate the results of those meetings to look at the larger population? I'd be interested to hear about that too.
Yeah, that's really important. Thank you so much for naming that. Maybe the reason that we're doing this is because this is what's best for the people that we're serving, right? And how else can we help support them? To make sure that they can be there and participate if they otherwise maybe could not. So thank you so much. Rex, go ahead, you're next.
Yeah, hi. So my organization is doing this work with residents that live in this particular area where there's not very good internet access, and that's also where our offices are located. All of our staff have been working from home since the pandemic, so we've been okay with digital stuff, but the folks that live there have really struggled to participate virtually. And so now with more people getting vaccinated and starting to explore the possibility of having in-person meetings, we've also got this really crucial piece of work that we're doing with these consultants that live in Washington, D.C., which is very, very far away. So we've had to hold virtual meetings in order to be able to talk to these consultants and have them be in these meetings and running these meetings. However, if we could do a hybrid, that would make the people that live in the area so much more comfortable and be able to include these consultants. So the tech issue is kind of the thing that I don't know what to do about, but that's, in an ideal world, I would love to be able to have hybrid meetings.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think you know, to be honest, I think this is kind of the future, right? People aren't all going to be together. People moved. I mean, we had so many staff members at our organization move to different states over the last 18 months. It's not possible for them to be in person. And even if it was, maybe they're not comfortable with that. Or vice versa, you know, like you mentioned, there are folks who have poor internet access. Maybe it makes a lot more sense for them to be together, but then you still have to talk to your clients, your partners, other staff members that are outside of that space. And so I think, you know, of course, considering what makes the most sense for your group is sort of step one, but given sort of how things are moving with the world, I think, you know, thinking about these considerations, thinking about what you need to do to make a hybrid meeting happen is really important. And we are going to talk about technology in a little bit. So thank you for bringing that up. I just want to make sure I'm not ignoring what's on the screen as well. So I'm seeing things around, again, yep, so our participants, the folks that we're serving, decreasing social isolation, that's really interesting, getting from school to programming, yep, accessibility, increasing geographic reach and representation, making decisions based off of budgets, that's real, that's really real. You know, maybe this is this is the only option, right? Maybe it is, given your funding. Thank you for putting that out there. Local guidelines and mandates. Yeah, again, and the COVID considerations, like maybe this is the safest option, or maybe it's not, but maybe this is what your city, your state, et cetera, are suggesting you do in order to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. Awesome. Are there any other thoughts about this? Considerations people wanted to raise up or name? Okay, great. Good job, team. So Jasper, if you don't mind, again, taking one more screenshot, saving this work, and then clearing the screen. And we're going to move from sort of some of these considerations into what we want to call our packing list. So if we can jump to the next slide. I know there's a lot of words on the screen. Don't worry, going to walk us through it slowly. Again, wanting to offer people who learn differently, different ways to learn. So I'm going to sort of name these. And also if you're like, I want to tune her out and just read them, that's okay too. But we wanted to offer this not really as the be all end all, like you have to do every single thing or you're going to have a failure of a meeting, but just to give you some guidelines, some sort of general directions on things you should be thinking about. And again, you've named a lot of these. So I think it was Joanne at the beginning, our first breakout room took like, 3 or 4 of these. And I was like, Joanne could have led this part, right? So you're all thinking about these already, but we just wanted to put it out there and name it explicitly. So what are we doing to get ready? First things first, who's attending, right? Who's going to be there in person? Who's going to be there virtually? How many? What's the balance? Are those in-person people joining from the same room? Are they going to be, like Gina mentioned during our retreat, are they going to be in the same space, but maybe like separated out a little bit? Because that could influence the tech setup, right? Are they going to be on their own laptops? Is there going to be a conference room with technology and AV? If you're going to be at a venue, maybe not at your office, do you need to go visit? Do you need to go do setup? Do you need to do a run through? So just thinking about these things again, this is all that prep piece. So what are you doing ahead of time to make sure that you're ready, to make sure that your participants are ready? We've talked about this already, but again, naming explicitly, do we need ASL interpretation? Do we need other language interpretation? Do we need closed captioning? The answer is probably yes, but I also want to acknowledge that this can be really expensive. Not everyone can afford this. So what are other ways that we're making sure that we're doing everything we can and everything we can afford to be accessible to all of our participants? One thing that we like to do that's a best practice for us is to send a prep email. So I think you actually got 2 from me this time. So you got the first one that was like, hello, remember you signed up for this training a month ago, it's coming up. Here's the Zoom link again if you need it. And then we sent out the PowerPoint afterwards. So doing things like that, just to make sure that you are communicating as clearly as possible with your participants is really important, because what can happen is if, you have it all in your head, you're ready to go, and you don't share that explicitly with folks, there are going to be questions, and that's not a problem. Like it's okay if folks have questions. It's okay if they're a little bit confused when they join. But what you don't want is to be spending 30 minutes of your, hour and a half long meeting, making sure people are like ready to go on Zoom, right? So you want to do as much of that beforehand as you can, like really make sure you're being explicit, because I'll use myself as an example, use I statements. So I feel very comfortable with Zoom. So I tend to tune out the part where people are like, here's what we're doing, like here's Zoom, blah, blah, blah. But not everyone is that way, not everyone is on Zoom. Maybe you're on a different platform. Maybe you're not using anything online. Maybe you're just doing conference calls. I don't know what your situation is, right? So we can never assume. We can never assume that everyone is in the same space. So if you give them that information ahead of time, that can really mediate any technological issues or other logistical issues that you might encounter at the beginning of a meeting. Let's see. And then, so yes, the next thing is really doing a tech run through with your co-facilitator. So Gina and I, at about 9 a.m. this morning, we all hopped on this call. We made sure we were good to go on Zoom. We made sure the slides were ready, that everyone was clear on the tech roles. So making sure that you're communicating with your co-facilitator is really important. And sort of the point below that is having like an explicit way to communicate about how you're communicating. So for example, we use Microsoft Teams. So on the side, we can chat with each other, make sure that we're running on time. If we're running behind, we can kind of troubleshoot offline, because it can be really awkward. If I was like, oh my gosh, Gina, we're like 30 minutes behind, what do we do? In front of all of you, you'd be like, oh no, like they don't know what they're doing, right? So you want to make sure that you're maintaining your professionalism, for lack of a better term, your presence in front of the room, and not burdening your participants with those logistical things. You want to do that offline as much as possible. So if that's WhatsApp, if that's texting, if that's Teams, whatever works for you. If you want to do like messenger pigeons, whatever works. Just make sure that you're not putting that on your participants. And someone, I think, explicitly said this earlier, but make sure you have a plan B and C, right? Things are going to go awry. Things are going to get messed up. Things are going to happen. Life happens. Technology is not perfect. So really being flexible, making sure you have a backup plan, making sure you can adapt is like a huge thing that we want you to take away from this. And I think it might have been Kelsey had mentioned this from that first breakout room. This next point is if you're providing like in-person things like food, crafts, hands-on elements, etc. Like how are we getting that to our virtual participants? Are we going to mail them a box? Are we going to tell them to order it online, right? So how are we making sure that they can engage with the same things that we find it so easy to think about for in-person people? And then, really think about what are the goals for this meeting. Gina talked about this earlier in terms of having objectives, having goals. What are you trying to get out of this space? And this is, of course, similar in other meeting settings, but particularly for hybrid, when you have so many other things to think about, you want to be really clear about, okay, we've already picked this format. Here's what we're going to do. Here's where we're going to do it. And what do we want to get out of this? What is the point of this meeting? Is it a town hall? Is it an internal meeting? Is it a client meeting? Making sure you're being really explicit and really clear about that. And then also consider sharing the agenda. I'm going to steal this from Gina, but she does a lot of work with young people. And often we find that young people really need to know, like, okay, here's when I need to have my camera on. Here's when I can turn it off. Here's when I'm going to get a break. And like, to be honest, adults are the same way, right? Like we want to know when the break is. We want to know when we can step away, right? So if you can, sharing an agenda ahead of time is really helpful so that folks can kind of plan for that. Because if you know you're going to be sitting there for like an hour and a half through lunchtime, like I might bring my lunch to the meeting with me, right? You don't want people getting hungry and cranky right in the middle and not being productive. So just considering that as well. So I'm going to pause. That was a lot of talking. Are there any questions? Are there any things that I missed that people want to raise up? Or are we all like, we got this? Go ahead, Gina.
No, I was just going to add that the reason we called this a packing list, just to reiterate the idea that like you're going to be spending as much time, if not more, prepping for this meeting as if you were going to an in-person meeting, right? If you were leading something in person, you'd kind of do some similar to what Tanaya mentioned we do. Lug some flip chart paper, maybe some markers, bring materials, a printout of your evaluation form, all that kind of fun stuff, right? And so just because you're doing something online or something in the hybrid format doesn't mean that all of a sudden you don't still have to think about these things. And so they just look a little bit different in terms of the materials, the consideration. So you're still packing. You just don't have as many physical things as you probably would have had pre-pandemic. And so just making sure that you're asking yourself these questions and you're allowing enough time in order to prep for what this looks like. And so if you want to be able to share your agenda ahead of time, send materials off, creating a schedule for yourself of what that looks like. I'm going to share it here. If anybody has any questions here, making sure that you're sort of prepping and having your plan B and C as backup as well.
Definitely. And I realized I forgot to name this too, but one of our best practices, promising practices, is to only distribute documents virtually. It's not super fun if you're in the in-person setting and you're all flipping through your paper or you're writing on your flip chart and the people online are like, we can't see that. So if you're going to have an online component, we recommend that everything that you're going to be looking at, that you're going to be viewing, that you're going to be reading should be accessible online. Just so that everyone is quite literally on the same page. But I want to make sure I'm not stepping over anybody. So is there anything on here or anything that's missing? Anyone want to lift anything up or maybe comment on what you think would be really easy about this or maybe something that's challenging about this? Just give you all a moment to respond.
I think one question I have is about audio. I think this is really, really hard to have it set up so that people who are in an in-person room can be heard by people on a remote platform. And I'm just wondering, so we've used room cams before. I feel like the visual is easier, but it just seems like unless each person literally has a microphone or the microphone's passed to them, and they're speaking right into it, people who are remote won't be able to hear. So I'm wondering what has worked for others.
Yeah, I'm going to kick that out to the room. Does anyone have thoughts? Things that have really worked well in terms of accommodating the audio piece? I see Jill suggesting the facilitator could type comments in the chat. Definitely. I think I saw someone earlier, I don't mean to call anyone out, but someone mentioned the OWL tool, and I've seen that a couple of times. I don't know who said that, but if someone has used that and wants to share more, I'd invite you to do so. Or maybe they left. It's still hard to hear those in the room. Okay, thank you, Beth. That's good to know. Yeah, I think that's definitely something to consider. There's not a perfect answer. I think we did on our resources page include a couple of different speaker/mics. So we would recommend if you can have something like that, that's really helpful. But yeah, I think definitely budgets can be an issue. And was it Catherine who mentioned the local access TV might be another way to kind of get around that. So I think those types of things can be really helpful. But again, I think some of you had some experience with this, so I want to make sure I'm not talking over people.
I know we've done a couple of things. I don't have a perfect answer to this question either. I think audio stuff is tough, especially when you have folks joining from a room. And so we've done so some of our conference rooms are equipped with like the mics that are up high somewhere, that exist somewhere in the ceiling to pick up sound in the room. Those are not the greatest, but they're probably better than like a laptop. I saw someone added in the chat box, like a couple people calling in. So yeah, and then you have the weird thing where you have to like, everyone has to mute and then like only one person can unmute at a time. And so oftentimes we just recognize that like, if we're in a space where we know audio is like tough, that like we spent extra time just being really clear, like taking our time with dealing with what it is that, you know, that's coming up in terms of audio issues. And so it just takes a lot of grace, I think, from the facilitator and from the participants as well to kind of navigate what that looks like, because we want people to be able to participate in a way that makes sense for them. And sometimes that brings with it a lot of challenges. And so problem solving in the moment is certainly something that we're very familiar with, especially when it comes to audio issues. We would have pre-pandemic, we would have literally a checklist of things that we needed to do when it came to sound in our conference rooms. Like the speaker is going to be on this laptop and that's going to share sound and screen. And then the other laptop joins, that's the co-host, they have to mute right away because it does create feedback in the room when you're sharing multiple microphones and they're coming from multiple places, which is where practicing ahead of time and prepping is really helpful, because then you can sort of mitigate some of those issues before they actually happen. But yeah, not a perfect answer, but just sharing some things that have worked for us.
Any other questions or comments before we move forward? Okay, I'll invite you to continue adding anything that you would like to the chat, but just wanted to quickly highlight this key takeaway. So we've already kind of named this, but just to say, you know, hybrid meetings really require a lot more prep than other meeting formats. So make sure you're spending that time, make sure you're preparing your participants, but also like, it's okay if things don't go to plan, right? It's okay to have a good sense of humor about it. Be flexible, be adaptable. It's all going to be okay. I think a lot of people are a lot more forgiving of you than we are of ourselves as facilitators. So if you mess up a little, if the tech doesn't work quite perfectly, like it's going to be okay. So just, you know, keep that good sense of humor, keep that flexibility. And I think with that, we're going to talk a little bit more about challenges. So I'm going to kick it back over to Gina.
Awesome. So the last sort of piece that we're going to do is we're going to do a small group brainstorm. And to model some of this, again, in terms of our process tools, the Community Health Training Institute has had a number of different experiences when it comes to challenges for facilitating hybrid or online spaces, right? Like we can come up with a whole list of things that folks are dealing with, but we have our own perspective of what that looks like, because the way our program runs and who our audience is, it's going to look different than some of the challenges that you all are facing in the groups that you're engaging with. And so the reason that we didn't just say, okay, here's some common challenges, let's talk about these. We want to give you all some space in this next brainstorm to really give a list of like, what are things that are coming up in your spaces or things that you think might come up when you start facilitating hybrid meetings? What are those challenges? What are things that are getting in the way? And I recognize that there's probably going to be a lot of tech issues that come up, because naturally that's, you know, we're all still learning and figuring out what those online spaces look like and how to navigate Zoom and WebEx and GoToMeeting and all those kind of things, right? And so we encourage you to put those, but like what else? Like what other things are coming up for you? What are some other challenges that are happening for you in your spaces? Outside of technology stuff as well. So we want you to add that all in the brainstorm. We are going to add the Google, I see Jasper already sent it, the Google link back in the chat box. And all you have to do is scroll down. So our first brainstorm is still there. All you have to do is scroll down to brainstorm number 2 that has the instructions. And I think we also have the instructions on the next slide, Kelly. Oh, no, I lied, never mind. We don't have the instructions on the next slide, but we do have them at the top of that second section on the Google slides. So really you're just brainstorming what are challenges that come up for you in hybrid spaces or that you think you might run into when you are facilitating hybrid spaces. We're going to give you some time to brainstorm. And then when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of sharing, but in day 2, we're actually going to go in and start doing a little bit of practice and like how to come up with some strategies for challenges. So make sure you come back on Thursday if you can. But I think with that said, does anybody have any questions before we send you into breakout rooms? Yes, thank you so much, Tanaya. Those challenges are meant to be specific to you. Please feel free to get into the weeds on what's, because what we're gonna do is take a look at them and start planning for day 2 on Thursday, and really try to address as much as we can based on what you all come up with. So I think with that being said, I'm gonna invite Jasper to open the breakout rooms. Yeah, if you need to head off, thank you so much. But yeah, if you can join the breakout rooms, please do. We'd love to hear from you all. So click the link, the Google Sheets, and then head off to your breakout room. And if you missed the pop-up, all you have to do is click the little breakout room button on the bottom bar. It should come up for you. All right, and if you have any trouble, just let us know. All right, folks are starting to trickle back in. We've got about 5 more seconds before everyone is officially kicked back out into this main space. There's the participant count going back up again. All right. I think everyone is back. Welcome back, friends. Just to give you a little bit of behind the scenes sort of facilitator calls, we made the executive decision to give you as much time as we could in your brainstorming. And so we decided to cut the share backs unless there's like a really important burning comment that someone wants to get out into this large group. We want to invite you all, for those of you that are able to access the Google Slides, is to start scrolling through, and Kelly is sharing her screens for those that can't access it. Start scrolling through what other groups put down as their challenges. We had a total of 8 groups, and we just want you to see, like, is there other things that you haven't considered that folks are dealing with? Is there similarities between these lists? Are you all done with Zoom, hate it, and are trying to figure out like how to make your lives better? Is there a magical tool out there that we would suggest? Perhaps, maybe, I don't know, you'll have to come back to day 2 to find out. A little bit teaser there. Joanna sharing in the chat box, Reacher says best Zoom meetings are among those who already have rapport and know each other already. Makes perfect sense, and completely agree. And so when we don't have that, right, when we're bringing a new group of people together that have only met in this online space, like what does that make us question as facilitators? What are things that we need to do in order to try to build community, try to build rapport in online or hybrid spaces? What does that look like? So want to leave you all with that and say, kind of do a little bit of foreshadowing for what's going to happen on day 2. And so you all did a wonderful brainstorms. I can't wait to dig back in on Thursday. So we'll be here on Thursday, same time, same place, at 9:30 to 12:30 Eastern Standard Time. And the first part, we're going to do a little bit of recap of what day 1 looked like. And then we're going to start digging into these challenges and really start to think about what are some strategies to address the things that you all came up with. Tanaya and I are really going to take a look and see if there are any sort of themes that come up. I can already imagine that there's a lot of tech stuff that we'll have to parse out a little bit to see how we can help folks navigate through that. And then, as Tanaya mentioned, we're going to be doing a little bit of crowdsourcing, right? And we'd love to hear from you all, sort of what are some ways that you found to address some of these challenges, if you found an answer to a challenge that someone else is facing. So we're going to do a little bit of that as well. And then we're also going to get into facilitation, hybrid facilitation practice. Like, what are some things that we can do to start to build our own muscle memory? What's it like to be a facilitator in this space, and how to deal with these challenges that could come up. So that's what we got planned for day 2. We're very excited. If for some reason someone wasn't able to make it to day 1 but wants to come to day 2, it's still open. So you're welcome to invite some colleagues. Or if you're not able to make it to day 2, both sessions are being recorded and they will be shared via our YouTube channel after the fact. And so you're welcome to go back and watch the recording as well. And you already have the PowerPoint slides, but we'll share them again. Trying to think if there's anything else. And these Google slides will, once we're done sort of working with them after day 2, we'll kind of stop the editing process so we can capture and solidify our conversations, and you can go back to that link and revisit any of the conversations that we had and any resources shared in those spaces as well. But I think that is it. Tanayo, any last closing words before we close out?
Not too many, just thank you all so much for coming and engaging. We really hope you'll come back and help us think about solutions on Thursday. But you were such a great group. Thank you for bringing the energy.
Thank you all so much. We've got a minute to spare. And yeah, so excited to see you all at day 2. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming. You can unmute and say goodbye if you want to.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you.